the Pacific Northwest, a place of rugged beauty, towering forests, sparkling rivers. But in the 1980s, a shadow fell across this picturesque landscape. A cold fear gripped the region. Young women, their laughter silenced, began to disappear, vanishing without a trace. Whispers of a killer preying on the innocent spread like wildfire. The victims were daughters, sisters, friends. Each disappearance left behind a void, a raw wound in the hearts of loved ones. Panic swelled as the body count rose. The authorities, initially dismissive, were forced to confront a horrifying reality. A serial killer stalked their streets. The river, a lifeline of the region, became synonymous with terror. Its once serene waters now reflected the faces of the missing, their memories a haunting reminder of the evil lurking nearby. His victims, often marginalized and forgotten, became tragic footnotes in a growing terror. The riverbanks, once teeming with life, transformed into macabre crime scenes. Bodies discarded like broken dolls surfaced with grim regularity. Each discovery sent shockwaves through the community, deepening the sense of dread. The killer, it seemed, chose his victims carefully, exploiting their vulnerability with chilling precision. Girls escaping troubled homes, seeking help and solace in the streets. Women and their lives already touched by hardship, disappearing into the night. Their stories, often untold, were tragically cut short. The river, a silent witness, accepted their broken bodies, their final resting place a watery grave. The killer's methods were brutal, his cruelty a terrifying testament to the darkness that resided within him. Strangulation, a slow, agonizing death. He seemed to relish the control, the power over life and death. And then he would vanish, melting back into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and unbearable grief. He was a man of simple means. His days were spent in overalls, working when not killing. To his neighbors and acquaintances, there was nothing particularly remarkable about him. He was just another face in the crowd, another suburban dad juggling the everyday demands of work and family life. Yet beneath this mundane exterior lurked a mind twisted by dark impulses. His ordinary job, his ordinary home, his ordinary life, all served as the perfect cover for his sinister double life. This contrast between his outward normalcy and inner malevolence was what made him so terrifyingly effective. He was, in essence, hiding in plain sight, his true nature known only to himself and his unfortunate victims. Inside his modest home, life proceeded as it does in many such households. There were dinners around the family table, children's laughter echoing through the halls, and the usual domestic challenges. But these ordinary scenes were a mere facade, a strategic cover for the horrors he secretly relished. It was in this chilling juxtaposition that the true horror of his existence lay. His neighbors would later recall him as quiet, unassuming, even bland. They would struggle to reconcile their memories of the man they thought they knew with the monstrous reality of his crimes. This dissonance would only add to the collective shock when his true identity was finally revealed. The realization that such evil had lived among them, undetected and unsuspected, would haunt them for years to come. The killer's ability to maintain a facade of normality was bolstered by his seemingly stable personal life. Married several times, he was viewed as a family man, his marital home a supposed bastion of normalcy. This aspect of his life played a crucial role in masking his psychopathic tendencies. His wives, like the community around him, saw no signs of the darkness that lay beneath his calm exterior. In social settings, he was polite, even charming at times, adept at small talk, and seemingly engaged in community activities. His participation in local events, his presence at school functions for his children, all helped to build a protective shell of ordinariness around him. This normalcy was his armor, his most effective tool in deflecting any suspicions about his true nature. Yet this normal appearance was meticulously crafted, each action calculated to build and maintain the image of an average harmless citizen. His interactions were measured, his routines deliberately mundane. In these details he found the safety to hide his gruesome hobby. The normality he displayed was as much a weapon as it was a shield, facilitating his vile activities by ensuring that he remained above suspicion. His family, tragically, was oblivious to the dual life he led. They saw the husband and father. This separation of his two worlds was a calculated maneuver, a way to ensure that his dark side could operate without hindrance. It was a testament to his manipulative skills, a horrifying duality that allowed him to carry out his crimes with chilling efficiency. Yet the seeds of his later atrocities could be traced back to much earlier in his life. As a child, he exhibited behaviors that, in retrospect, were red flags pointing to his deep-seated psychopathic traits. Instances of cruelty towards animals, a common early warning sign in many serial killers, were reported by those who knew him during his youth. These acts were his first steps on a path that would lead to much greater violence. His adolescence was marked by troubling interactions with peers and authority figures. He was often described as a loner, someone who struggled to form normal relationships. His inability to connect on a meaningful level with others may have been an early indicator of his lack of empathy, a trait that would later define his gruesome acts. High school was no different. While he managed to avoid serious trouble, his behavior was consistently marked by a cold detachment from those around him. Teachers noted his lack of interest in social activities and his preference for solitary pursuits. These characteristics, while not uncommon in teenagers, were particularly pronounced in him, hinting at the emotional disconnect that would later allow him to commit his crimes without remorse. These early signs of darkness were largely overlooked or misunderstood by those around him. In a time less aware of the psychological profiles typical of violent offenders, these behaviors did not set off the alarms they might today. This oversight allowed his darker impulses to go unchecked, gradually coalescing into the monstrous persona he would eventually unveil. As he transitioned into adulthood, the compartmentalization of his life became more pronounced. By day, he was the unremarkable worker, a husband and father. But as the sun set, another side of him emerged. This nighttime persona was methodical, cold, and utterly devoid of empathy. It was during these hours that he planned and executed his sinister activities. His choice of victims was strategic. He targeted those who he believed would not be immediately missed. Runaways and sex workers became his favorite primary targets. Their societal invisibility made them perfect prey, reducing the likelihood of a swift law enforcement response. His approach was often one of feigned sympathy or offers of help, tactics that lowered the defenses of his victims. Once he had gained their trust, the true horror would begin. His methods were brutal and varied, but strangulation was a common theme. It was a means of control, a way to exert ultimate power over his victims. The secluded woodlands near the river became his grim stage, where he carried out his heinous acts away from prying eyes. The dual life he led was a chilling demonstration of his ability to dissociate his violent behavior from his public persona. To the world, he remained a nondescript suburban resident. In secret, however, he was a predator stalking his prey with terrifying precision. This ability to live a seemingly normal life while committing such atrocities is what ultimately made him one of the most horrifying figures in criminal history. As darkness descended upon the city, he would shed his skin of normalcy. Gone was the quiet family man, replaced by a predator driven by a thirst for control and domination. The city streets, pulsing with life, became his hunting ground, his eyes scanning for vulnerable prey. He was drawn to the fringes of society, to those he deemed disposable, their disappearances unlikely to cause a stir. He often frequented areas known for prostitution, his gaze lingering on young women forced by circumstance into a dangerous life. He would study their routines, their vulnerabilities, their moments of desperation. He would present himself as a good Samaritan, offering a warm meal, a place to rest, a sympathetic ear. His demeanor was disarming, his words carefully chosen to gain their trust. Many of his victims were runaways, teenagers who had fled abusive homes or sought escape from lives of poverty and neglect. He recognized the desperation in their eyes, the longing for a safe haven, and he exploited it with chilling precision. He would offer them shelter, a chance to escape the harsh realities of the streets, a promise of a better life. His vehicle, a nondescript van, became an instrument of deception. Its unremarkable appearance lulled his victims into a false sense of security. The interior, however, was his mobile torture chamber, a place where innocence was extinguished and darkness reigned supreme. He would drive them away from the familiar, deeper into the embrace of the forest, where the city lights faded and the whispers of the green river beckoned. His promises were as empty as the graves he would leave behind. The offer of a hot meal would often lead to a secluded clearing, the promise of shelter to a desolate stretch of riverbank. Once away from the prying eyes of the city, his true nature would surface. The mask of kindness would slip, revealing the killer beneath. He would often use restraints, binding his victims, their struggles only fueling his sadistic desires. He seemed to revel in their fear, their pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. The silence of the forest was broken only by their muffled cries and the sickening sounds of his brutality. Sometimes he would prolong their suffering, subjecting them to hours, even days of torture. He would derive pleasure from their pain, their degradation, their utter helplessness. He documented some of his crimes, taking Polaroid pictures of his victims in their final moments. Their eyes, wide with terror, stared back at him, a chilling testament to him. The river, a silent witness to his depravity, flowed relentlessly, its murky depths concealing the horrors enacted on its banks. He would dispose of his victims' bodies with a chilling practicality, often returning to the sites to move remains or further degrade them. The river, its waters stained with the blood of innocents, became an accomplice to his crimes. He seemed to possess an uncanny knowledge of the area, selecting remote locations accessible only by dirt roads and overgrown trails. He knew these woods like the back of his hand, his familiarity allowing him to operate with chilling efficiency. The dense undergrowth and the river's currents often conspired to hide his gruesome handiwork, delaying discovery and frustrating investigators. The discovery of the first bodies sent shockwaves through the community. The sheer brutality of the crimes, coupled with the killer's apparent knowledge of the area and his ability to evade capture, created a climate of fear. The river killer, as he would come to be known, had cast a long shadow over the region, his name whispered in hushed tones, a spectre haunting the dreams of its residents. As the body count rose, so did the pressure on law enforcement. Task forces were assembled, resources poured into the investigation, but the killer remained elusive. The river seemed to mock their efforts, its waters whispering secrets that only the killer knew. His killings followed a chilling pattern, a ritualistic element woven into his acts of violence. Strangulation was his preferred method, his powerful hands squeezing the life out of his victims. He seemed to draw a perverse satisfaction from feeling their last breath escape, their eyes staring blankly into the void. Afterward, he would often pose the bodies, arranging them in grotesque tableaux. Sometimes he would return to the crime scenes days later, driven by a compulsion to relive his gruesome handiwork. He would violate the bodies further, his necrophilia a testament to the depths of his depravity. He often took trophies from his victims, small personal items that he would keep as mementos of his crimes. These trinkets, imbued with the terror of their former owners, were stored in his home, hidden among his ordinary possessions, a chilling reminder of the double life he led. He seemed to derive a twisted sense of power from keeping these souvenirs, each one a testament to his ability to control and dominate his victims, even in death. As the investigation dragged on, he grew bolder, seemingly toying with the authorities. He would leave bodies in areas where he knew they would be found, taunting the police with his elusiveness. He seemed to relish the fear he instilled, the knowledge that he was always one step ahead. His arrogance, fueled by his belief that he would never be caught, would ultimately play a crucial role in his downfall. Fear, like a suffocating fog, settled over the Pacific Northwest. The once vibrant streets, bustling with life, now felt eerily empty, the laughter of children replaced by a haunting silence. The river killers' reign of terror had transformed their everyday lives into a waking nightmare, their city held hostage by an unseen enemy. Women, once carefree, became prisoners in their own homes, their movements restricted by an unspoken curfew of fear. The simple act of walking alone, once mundane, now carried the weight of terrifying possibilities. Each passing car, every unfamiliar face could be him lurking in the shadows. Mothers clutched their daughters closer, their hearts heavy with unspoken dread. Bedtime stories, once filled with magic and adventure, now carried the chilling weight of warnings. Don't talk to strangers became a mantra, a desperate attempt to shield their children from the darkness they themselves could barely comprehend. The river killer's presence was felt everywhere, a chilling reminder of their vulnerability. He had shattered their sense of security, their belief that such evil could not touch their lives. Their once idyllic corner of the world, nestled amidst the beauty of the Pacific Northwest, had been tainted by his touch, the landscape forever scarred by the memory of his victims. The growing body count fueled a media frenzy. The river killer's crime splashed across newspapers and television screens. The victims' faces, young and full of life, stared back at them, a haunting reminder of the lives cut tragically short. Every detail, every gruesome discovery only deepened the collective sense of dread. The police, facing mounting pressure to catch the monster in their midst, worked tirelessly, chasing down every lead, no matter how insignificant it might seem. Task forces were assembled, bringing together the best detectives, forensic experts and profilers. Their determination fueled by a potent mix of professional obligation and raw human empathy. Yet the river killer remained frustratingly elusive. His knowledge of the area, his meticulous planning, and his ability to blend seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life made him a ghost, a nightmare they could not grasp. The investigation dragged on, days turning into weeks, weeks into months, and still he remained at large, his shadow growing longer with each passing day. The families of the missing, their hearts shattered by unimaginable loss, clung to hope. They organized vigils, their candles flickering in the darkness, a silent plea for their loved ones' safe return. But as time wore on, hope began to dwindle, replaced by a numbing grief, the agonizing realization that they might never know what happened to their daughters, their sisters, their friends. The river killer, emboldened by his success, seemed to revel in the fear he had unleashed. He began toying with the police, leaving cryptic messages, taunting them with his elusiveness. He would call in tips, his voice a chilling whisper, leading them on wild goose chases, only to vanish before they could catch up. He seemed to delight in demonstrating his control, his ability to manipulate the investigation. He would leave bodies in plain sight, daring the police to find them, his arrogance a testament to his belief that he was smarter, more cunning than those who pursued him. He saw himself as a puppet master, orchestrating a macabre play, the authorities mere pawns in his twisted game. His taunts, a mix of arrogance and desperation, only fueled the investigators' determination. They pored over every detail, every clue, every word he uttered, searching for the one misstep, the one oversight that would break the case wide open. They knew that he craved attention, that his ego was as much a weakness as it was a strength. They just needed to find a way to use it against him. The cat-and-mouse game continued for years, the river killer always one step ahead. He seemed to know their every move, anticipating their strategies, evading their grasp with chilling ease. Each time they thought they were close, he would vanish, melting back into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of frustration, anger, and a growing sense of despair. The investigation, hampered by dead ends and false leads, became a grueling test of endurance. Suspects were interrogated, their lives dissected, only to be cleared, their names added to a growing list of those who had been investigated and dismissed. The lack of progress fueled public frustration, the community demanding answers, demanding justice for the victims and their families. The pressure on the task force was immense. The river killer had become a symbol of their inability to protect the innocent, a stain on their professional record. They worked tirelessly, sacrificing their personal lives, their health, their sanity, driven by a relentless pursuit of justice. But the killer remained a phantom, his motives as murky as the waters of the river that bore witness to his crimes. The case went cold for periods, the lack of new victims offering a glimmer of hope that perhaps the killer had moved on or met his own demise. But just as quickly as the fear subsided, it would return with a vengeance. A new body surfacing, a fresh wave of terror washing over the community. The river killer, it seemed, would not be easily forgotten. He had woven himself into the fabric of their lives, a chilling reminder that evil could lurk in the most unexpected places, that no one, not even in the seemingly idyllic Pacific Northwest, was truly safe. Years bled into decades. The river killer, once a spectre haunting the present, became a chilling memory, a ghost story whispered by those who remembered the terror of his reign. The task force, once a beacon of hope, dwindled, its resources redirected to newer, more pressing cases. But the victims remained, their faces forever frozen in time, their stories a stark reminder of the darkness that had visited their community. Yet, even as the trail seemed to run cold, a silent revolution was brewing in the world of criminal justice. Forensic science, once a fledgling discipline, was rapidly evolving, its tools becoming more sophisticated, its reach more profound. DNA technology, in its infancy during the early days of the investigation, was emerging as a game-changer, its ability to link criminals to their crimes with unprecedented accuracy, a beacon of hope in the fight against seemingly unsolvable cases. The River Task Force, though decimated by time and disillusionment, never completely gave up. They clung to the belief that one day somehow they would bring the killer to justice. They meticulously preserved every piece of evidence, every fibre, every hair, every drop of blood, knowing that even the smallest clue could hold the key to unlocking the mystery that had haunted them for so long. And then a breakthrough. A seemingly insignificant piece of evidence, collected years earlier from the body of one of the victims, yielded a DNA profile. A partial profile. Fragmented and incomplete, but a profile nonetheless. It was a faint whisper from the past, a ghost in the machine, but it was enough to rekindle the dying embers of hope. The partial DNA profile, a string of genetic code, was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, a national database containing the genetic fingerprints of convicted felons and unsolved crimes. The system whirred to life, comparing the profile against millions of others, searching for a match, a connection, a name to attach to the shadow that had haunted them for so long. Days turned into weeks, each passing hour an agonizing eternity for the investigators who had staked their careers, their sanity, their very souls on catching the killer. They knew that the odds were stacked against them. DNA technology was still relatively new, the database far from complete. The chances of finding a match, especially from a partial profile collected years earlier, were slim at best. But then, a flicker, a hit. The system had found a potential match, not a perfect match, but close enough to warrant further investigation. The name attached to the profile sent a jolt of electricity through the weary investigators. A name previously investigated and cleared, a name that had lingered on the periphery of the case for years, a name that would soon become synonymous with unimaginable horror. A truck painter by trade, a seemingly ordinary man with a wife and a son, a man who had even been interviewed by investigators years earlier, his demeanour calm, his alibi seemingly airtight. A man who had blended so seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life that he had become invisible, a ghost in plain sight. Could this be the monster they had been hunting for all these years? The name hung in the air, a dark cloud settling over the investigation. The investigators, though cautiously optimistic, knew that they had been down this road before. False leads, dead ends, and the crushing weight of expectation had taken their toll. They needed to proceed carefully, meticulously, to build an ironclad case, one that would finally bring the river killer to justice and provide some measure of closure to the families of the victims who had waited so long for answers. A team of detectives was dispatched to revisit, to observe him, to dig deeper into his past, to uncover any inconsistencies, any cracks in the facade he had so carefully constructed over the years. They watched his house, his movements, his interactions with neighbours, hoping to catch a glimpse of the monster they believed lurked beneath the surface. Meanwhile, the forensic team worked tirelessly, analysing the DNA evidence, comparing it to samples collected during the initial investigation. The technology had advanced considerably since then, allowing them to extract more information from even the most degraded samples. The pressure was immense. The fate of the investigation, the hope of bringing closure to decades of pain and uncertainty, rested on their shoulders. As the investigation intensified, a sense of inevitability began to take hold. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered and incomplete for so long, were finally starting to come together. The name, once a whisper, was now spoken with a mix of dread and anticipation. A name that would forever be etched in the annals of criminal history. The DNA evidence, analysed and reanalyzed, came back with a resounding certainty, was a match to the killer. The odds of a coincidental match were astronomical, irrefutable proof that the man they had in their sights was the monster who had terrorized their community for so long. Armed with this newfound certainty, the detectives moved to arrest. He was apprehended outside the factory where he worked, his expression a mixture of shock and resignation, the mask of normalcy finally slipping, revealing the cold, calculating predator beneath. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the community, a mixture of relief, disbelief, and a profound sense of validation for the families of the victims who had waited so long for this day. Under interrogation, confronted with the overwhelming evidence against him, cracked. He confessed to the murders of 48 women, his voice devoid of emotion as he recounted his gruesome acts in chilling detail. He led investigators to the shallow graves of several victims, their remains scattered along the banks of the river, a testament to the depravity he had tried so desperately to conceal. The trial that followed was a media spectacle, the courtroom packed with journalists, spectators, and the families of the victims, their faces etched with a mixture of grief, anger, and a yearning for justice. The evidence against Ridgway was overwhelming. DNA, eyewitness accounts, and his own chilling confessions. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The killer had finally been unmasked, his reign of terror brought to an end. But the scars he left on the community, the families forever shattered by his crimes, the memory of the victims lost but never forgotten, would endure. A chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordinary lives. The seemingly ordinary truck painter stood revealed as a monster. The man who had shared meals with neighbours, attended school plays, and blended seamlessly into the mundane routines of suburban life had for years harboured a horrifying secret. The killer now had a name, a face, a terrifying reality. His trial was a spectacle of sorrow and rage. Families of the victims, their hearts shattered, their lives irrevocably altered, confronted the man who had stolen their daughters, their sisters, their friends. They spoke of their loss, their anger, their enduring pain, their words echoing through the courtroom, a testament to the devastating ripple effects of his crimes. In a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, agreed to cooperate with authorities, leading them to the remains of several victims whose fates had remained unknown. This act, while providing a measure of closure for some families, did little to assuage the horror of his crimes or the depth of their grief. The task force, their tireless efforts spanning decades, had finally achieved their goal. The killer had been caught, his reign of terror brought to an end. But victory was a bittersweet symphony. The scars of the investigation, the years spent chasing a ghost, the countless hours spent poring over grisly details, had taken their toll. The legacy of the river killer extended far beyond the courtroom, seeping into the very fabric of the Pacific Northwest. The idyllic image of the region, its pristine beauty juxtaposed against the darkness that had unfolded there, was forever altered. The river, once a symbol of life and tranquility, now flowed with the weight of unspeakable sorrow, its name forever entwined with the memory of the victims. The case served as a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of those living on society's margins. The victims, their stories forced a long overdue reckoning, a societal introspection on the ways in which prejudice and apathy can blind us to the suffering of others. In the aftermath of the trial, communities grappled with the question of how such evil could have flourished undetected for so long. The case highlighted the importance of forensic science, its evolution a beacon of hope in the fight against violent crime, but it also underscored the need for vigilance, for a collective responsibility to look beyond appearances, to recognize the subtle signs of danger, and to speak out against injustice wherever it may be found. A somber reminder of the fragility of life, the enduring power of grief, and the importance of seeking justice for those whose voices have been silenced. Their stories, forever linked to tragedy, serve as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the unwavering love of families, and the enduring pursuit of truth. The question remains, who could this be?